Want to welcome you all this afternoon to our third edition of our OSEEL Guides Workshop series. And today we're going to be talking about data, understanding data, using data, all those things. Again, I'm Alicia Reeves. I'm currently the Assistant Early Learning Administrator for the Office of Special Education and Early Learning, a former DOS, a former preschool coordinator. And we're just happy that you all could be here today and that you prioritize this in your time, because I know there's a lot happening in your districts right now. So for our agenda today, we're going to be looking at state assessments and indicator 3. We're going to look at tools for effective implementation of math and literacy practices for students with disabilities. Data, looking specifically at indicator 4 and significant disproportionality, using data to inform special education behavior and behavior data tools for your districts, and then leadership practices as they relate to all of these things. Brinley, if you want to do the next slide, I'll do norms and then I'll do introduction. So our workshop norms today, we want you to attend and participate. We do have some opportunities for you all to respond today and block off this time in your calendars. If at all possible, have your cameras on. We wish we could be in person. However, the best way to get you all in a meeting at one time is online often. Be sure to ask questions. Please make this your own. Unmute, ask questions in the chat. We want this to be valuable for you. And then at the end, we always want you to be able to think about that immediate next step, what you're going to do within the next week and a half to have an action item on what we discussed today. And so for our team today, from our Kentucky team, we have Veronica Sullivan, who is the director of the Division of IDEA Implementation in Preschool. We have Jared Sloan, who is an exceptional child specialist within the Office of Special Education and Early Learning. And he's one of our go-to data people. And then, of course, we have Amy Patterson, who is our Part B data manager. And if you don't know these guys yet, we hope you listen to them today and know that they're at the office level working for you. So, and then Frank, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the TASTE team.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Podobnik. I'm one of the associate directors for the Center for Technical Assistance for Excellence in Special Education, or TASTE, from Utah State University. And real quickly today, we have working in the background, we have Brinley Jones. You'll see her on the screen as Zoom help. If you have any issues, you can chat with her or email her and she can help you out. We have also Kristen Perez-Rickles, who's one of our technical assistant specialists, who won't be talking with you today, but is here if you can chat with her if you have a question. Today, you're going to be hearing from Steve Smith, who's another one of our associate directors. He's going to talk to you about the Indicator 3 stuff. And Susan Wagner, who is from Data Driven Enterprises, who is one of our partners, long-term partners here at TASTE. And she's going to be talking to you about the Indicator 4 and significant disproportionality stuff. So with that, Alicia, I think I'm going to kick it over to Steve, right?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk to you today briefly about state assessments and students with disabilities, known as Indicator 3. So this first slide here, this is from the State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report. So the report that Alicia and her staff have to submit every year on February 1st to OSEP. Includes an indicator on assessment and students with disabilities. And what the state has to report on is the participation rate and the proficiency rate for grade level academic achievement standards, the proficiency rate for alternate academic achievement standards, and then the gap between children with IEPs and all students on the regular grade level tests. So go to the next slide. So here, this is just kind of the federal language around what's reported. for the participation rate. It's a straight percentage of children with IEPs who participated in the assessment, divided by those children with IEPs enrolled during the testing window. And I don't know how long your testing window is. I know some states the testing window is like a month, and some states it's like almost, it feels like open year round. But whatever that testing window is from the when it opens and you can first test the child with a disability all the way to the end of the last day to test, any child that's enrolled that has an IEP during that window is counted as in the participation rate. It's calculated separately for reading and math, not calculated and reported for any of the other subject matter areas that you might be testing on. So writing, science, those are important and great pieces of information and things to look at, but that's not what OSEP is requiring the state to report on. It's also calculated separately for grades 4, 8, and high school. And then it's based on all children with IEPs, including children with IEPs enrolled for a full academic year and those not enrolled for a full academic year. So if you've been around a while in education, not in your current roles maybe, but in education, back in the days of No Child Left Behind, that was a really big, important distinction of like, were they enrolled for a full academic year or not? For the reporting purposes for OSEP, it doesn't matter how long they were enrolled. If they were in the window and they had an IEP, they count in this calculation. Next. So this indicator 3B is all about grade level academic proficiency. So these are your students with disabilities who take the regular grade level assessment with or without accommodations. And it's the percent proficiency rate is the number of children scoring at or above proficient against those standards divided by the total who received a valid score and a proficiency level was assigned. So this is not exactly all the students who participated because they have to get a valid score and a proficiency level assigned. If you want to know more about the ins and outs of that, talk to somebody in your assessment office because they could probably talk to you about it all day. I only have 7 more minutes. Just like participation, separate calculations for reading and math, grades 4, 8, and high school, and the full academic year and the not full academic year counts towards proficiency as well. Go to the next one. So this indicator 3C is about alternate academic achievement and the proficiency rate of students with disabilities who take those assessments. Sometimes you might hear this referred to as the 1% test. And so when you're talking with folks in assessment or in OSEEL, you may hear it referred to as the 1% test. But this is for the students with disabilities taking the alternate assessments against alternate achievement standards. And it's also calculated separately for reading and math, grades 4, 8, and high school. And it does not matter how long the student was enrolled in your district. Next. And so this is a relatively new part of the indicator. I think it's been around for a few years, but this looks at the proficiency rate gap. So this is really looking at, are your students with disabilities achieving the same level on the assessment as students without disabilities? And so it calculates that gap for reading and math, grades 4, 8 in high school, full academic year and not full academic year, just like all the others. But really it's looking at gaps in the system. Like are your children with disabilities achieving at the same rate as others? And that could tell you something different than if they're achieving at a lower rate. And it is just the grade level academic achievement standard. So that last that group that takes the alternate assessment, they're not included in this calculation. It's just the grade level achievement standard. So it's basically indicator 3B, the proficiency rate for that group subtracted from the proficiency rate for all students. And next one. So public reporting, all of this information under ESEA has to be reported publicly. So when the state submits the APR to OSEP, they have to include where to find that information on the state's website. It is a requirement in IDA that they do that. For participation, they require all children with IEPs at the time of testing, even those that didn't participate and those that weren't enrolled for a full academic year. For performance, it's similar. And then the data included in the calculation is only children who had an IEP at the time of testing. So you might have some other calculations that are done in your state, some other ways to measure it, where you look at, were they a child with a disability at any point during the year? Were they a child with a disability at any point during the last 2 years? That sometimes happens with calculations for ELL students as well. For this purpose, it's just during that testing window were they on an IEP, whether they were identified like the day the testing window started, or whether they were like had an eligibility determination that they're no longer eligible, 5 days after the last test was administered. They still count. Next. So when Susan talks about the data for indicator 4 and significant disproportionality, she's going to talk to you about the what, the so what, and the now what. I'm going to talk to you now about the what else. So we're going to have a little theme of the what's. So what else? Your data, especially if you're in a larger district, medium to large district, you probably have a lot more information than what I just described the state having to report. Right. So when you're looking at your assessment data, I want to encourage you to look at the what else. What else is there that you could be looking at to see where you could improve, to see where maybe there are gaps that are masked or hidden in those higher level analyses. So you can look at other grade levels, right? There are tests given at grade levels that beyond 4 or 8 in high school. So you could look at third grade. You could look at disability category, right? Are children with disabilities having different results based on what their disability category is? Educational environment. Are the students in class 80% or more of the day in the regular class? Are they doing better or the same as students who are removed? Race, ethnicity, primary language. If you have, a large enough population where you'd have different, be able to do analysis on that. Gender, boys and girls, they have vastly different test outcomes. The school, so if you have multiple schools, you could look at it school by school, you could look at it teacher by teacher. You could look at it students receiving accommodations. How are they doing compared to students that don't have accommodations in their IEP and don't use those on the test? You could look at growth, and you could look at other assessments. So, you don't start taking the state assessment until third grade, but you're probably giving Dibbles assessments or some sort of math screening. What kind of results are you getting on those? You could look at the other subject area tests, science, those kind of things. So just that's what I want to leave you with is we spent a few minutes talking about what's required to be reported to the federal government, but really you have a lot more data and you can be looking at things beyond what's required. And now I think I will turn it over to Veronica unless there's any questions.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to take just a quick moment, and I'm going to say, Steve talked to you about the what. I'm going to talk to you about the how. How do we improve indicator 3 data? How do we improve indicator 4 data? So I'm gonna go through some resources just to tell you a little bit about the division that I oversee. We are organized in a way where the division that I oversee supports the special education programming through technical assistance and guidance and resources. So the guidance documents and tools that you see on our website or you receive come from our division. And if you are contacting the Department of Education with questions, whether that be compliance questions or implementation questions, they come to our division for support. So just so you kind of know who you're talking to. And of course, I have a whole wonderful staff. It's not me personally, but that's who you'll contact is our division for that type of support. So today I'm going to share with you some resources that will help you balance compliance and results and actually look at the how to improve that data. So we're going to start off with talking a little bit about implementation science, and I want to just quickly go over why that's important to you as a director of special education. If you haven't figured it out already, you have a hard job. There is a lot coming at you. Implementation science helps you organize information, organize your efforts. You also have a lot of challenging decisions to make. There's support around leadership and making decisions using data with database decision making. It's teams based, right? You can't do everything alone. Like I said, I don't do the support for the state alone. I have a whole team and you have a team as well. It also helps you focus on intentional training for teachers and your staff. And it focuses on looking at student outcome data to measure the effectiveness of your support system. Next slide. So I want you just to look at this for just a moment. This is one of my favorite slides that we share because I personally can relate to this in education. What we do is we have a whole lot of things happening at one time, right? And we're all working. We're working very, very hard. But what we struggle with is really focusing on how we get results. How do we get there? So even if we are successful, it's difficult without intentionality to figure out how we did that. How were we successful? Well, is it that it was the program, how we implemented it, what happened? Next slide. So when we look through the lens of implementation science, we actually are looking at it very differently. What we typically do in education is we go based on research, right? So we train on a certain research-based practice or an evidence-based practice that we see in the field that's been successful, and we take it straight into practice, right? We have a training, everyone attends, and then we say, go back and do, and we expect it to happen. And what ends up most of the time happening is it doesn't work, and we don't know why it didn't work. Or if it did work, like that picture shows, we don't know how it worked. So can you go back, please? Okay, thank you. So with implementation science, we really are focusing not so much on the practice. We'll select our research, and we know what we're going to practice, but we spend most of our time in that middle section of focusing on implementation and making it happen, not letting it happen or hoping it happens, but making it happen. Okay, next slide. So in Kentucky and actually across the nation, there's a requirement for a state systemic improvement plan. So that is actually indicator 17. Steve just talked to you about indicator 3 of the state performance plan annual performance report. So this is actually an indicator, and there's a link here where you can learn more about those indicators. There's an indicator guide that's available if you want to dig into that. What the indicator 17 or the, we'll say ESIP because we love acronyms, the ESIP does is it is a comprehensive, ambitious plan for improvement for our state. It engages stakeholders at all levels of the system, which would be the building, the district, the region, and the state. And it uses implementation science to improve results for students with disabilities. Next slide. Each state is required to have a state identified measurable result or a goal. So the goal for Kentucky is to increase the percentage of students with disabilities performing at or above proficient in middle school math, specifically at the 8th grade level. We did a lot of data analysis before selecting this measurable result. We did that with a team, a large team, and we chose 8th grade particularly because 8th grade is a dropout predictor. So when you look at indicator 17, you're going to see that we're focused on many of those indicators. So 8th grade was intentionally selected because we need to have students proficient in mathematics to decrease the dropout rate and increase the likelihood of graduation. We also chose that because of the data that Steve shared with you, the indicator 3 data. Math in middle school seemed to progressively decline, and we still are moving in that direction, but we're trying to improve that. And so we also know it's not going to happen overnight. We couldn't do this only measuring at 8th grade. So we are supporting teachers in middle school and in elementary school so that we're able to progressively move these students along. So by 8th grade, they are proficient. Next slide. So we are doing that in the state through what's called a transformation zone. And this slide gives you a little bit of information around what a transformation zone is. Typically in education, you're probably familiar with a pilot. This is a lot different from a pilot because with a pilot, you're going to try it in a couple of districts in the state, and then you're going to go statewide with it, maybe for a year, and then go statewide. With a transformation zone, you take a small slice of your system. So we may select a district or two to work in, and that district will select maybe 1 or 2 schools, depending on the size of the district. It could be more. So you want that slice to be small enough so that you are able to make quick changes to improve the system without messing up your system. And so it actually scales within instead of across. So when we've worked in our transformation zones, we did start with 1 or 2 schools. Some even chose to start with part of their school in elementary because they have so many teachers. And then from there, they learn. And then that first picture I showed you, they focused on what worked well in their implementation. And so they replicate that and they begin to grow and to scale within that school, within that district, and then within that region. So it's a deeper dive, but it is a different way of scaling than what we're familiar with. Next slide. This is just to give you an idea of the transformation zones that we have across the state. Our SERTACs, or Special Education Regional Technical Assistance Centers, they are trained in implementation science, and they help support those districts, and they work closely with the state. I showed that slide where it showed the linked teams. It's all levels of that system. And so our SERTACs help our districts who choose to engage in this work in setting up implementation teams, looking at their data, learning how to analyze that data, and looking deeply at the implementation practices through implementation measures. Next slide. So that was just a real quick overview of what we do with the State Systemic Improvement Plan and our transformation zones. But if you do want to learn more, or you think that might be something your district might be interested in, here is some information. You can always contact your SERTACs. And you can also contact our State Transformation Specialist, Shasta Hensley, who oversees that work. So now I'm going to go into some more tools for you. So out of our transformation zone work, we developed a Kentucky mathematics practice profile. Next slide. So what is a practice profile? So what a practice profile does is it operationalizes effective math practices. And as special educators, we're kind of familiar with this, task analysis, that kind of thing. You have to be able to see it. You have to be able to break it down. And so that practice profile really takes those practices, it breaks them down into components that are manageable, that are teachable for our teachers, they're learnable for our teachers, and they're doable in practice. And then it focuses on the teacher behavior. We're used to our academic standards focusing on student behavior. What do the students do? This is a little bit different. This is what do the teachers do? Because implementation science really does focus on the system of support for the teachers, so that will carry out into student success, right? We have to treat our teachers as students through this work. And those practice profiles help break that down so those teachers know exactly what they're supposed to do. And then the observer knows exactly where that teacher may need support. Next slide. So in developing those practice profiles, again, team-based, we bring teams together. So we brought content experts from across the state, regionally within KDE, and through institutes of higher education or our university partners. And we looked and we did research and looked at evidence-based practices, and we co-created that practice profile. So that wasn't just something that my team did. It was a co-created piece of work from across the state. Next slide. So we looked at in preparing teachers for effective instruction, like what are those pieces that are necessary for your teachers? What are the tools that the teachers need to have in order to effectively instruct in mathematics? And so those are listed here. They obviously have to know their academic standards. That practice profile helps them to implement those math standards. And then there is guidance out there on specially designed instruction. And when you receive this, these are links. So when you receive this from the Dose One Stop, you'll be able to click on those if you need that. And then they need to look at the IEP and then keep looking at data in order to effectively instruct in mathematics. Next slide. And then we're just going to pause here for a second. Did leave a QR code if you want to, take a snapshot of that to get the toolkit. Okay, next slide. So just to go over some of the contents of the toolkit, it has the math practice profile that we talked about. And that can be used to inform your coaching and your training of your teachers. It has planning tools for teachers to plan lessons. And it also has the Kentucky Mathematics Innovation Toolkit. So in our studies, when developing our practice profile, what we did learn is that most innovations do not have a measurement tool, a fidelity tool. And so we created one for mathematics. We brought those partners together to the table and we created a walkthrough instrument. Now, the thing about this walkthrough instrument that's unique to what we're used to with walkthrough instruments is it does not evaluate teachers. It is intended to evaluate the system of support. So in other words, if you see a teacher who's struggling with a particular practice, that should be taken into consideration aggregate. So all your teachers who are implementing using that practice profile, you would look to see if there's a commonality or an area that needs support, and you would design training for those teachers around that. So you're not evaluating the teacher, you're evaluating the support and training that's been provided to those teachers. Is that training carrying into effective practices within the classroom? And that's the intention behind this tool. Next slide.
And we just have a participant asking about the QR code. So I'm going to go back to this for just a second.
Okay.
So that
Sure.
they can capture that.
Sure.
And they're going to receive all of those links in the document that we provide at the end as well.
Okay. So next, I'm going to talk to you about the Kentucky Foundational Literacy Practice Profile. So like I said about when you see something that works, you replicate, right? So what we saw the effectiveness of the math practice profile and thought we really need to have something for literacy and particularly foundational literacy. And we called it, again, loving acronyms, the K-flip. So we're going to go on to that. Next slide. So the team that worked on this really thought through why foundational literacy, and it was our early childhood folks that came to us with this. But as we began to engage in this, we really thought about the effectiveness for all students with disabilities who may need support in literacy and how important foundational literacy is. So it expanded from there. So it did start from early childhood, but really the intention is there's no grade level that this is specific to. Next slide. And just like math instruction, this is, again, replication. What is it we expect to do to have in place for our teachers in order to effectively teach reading and writing instruction? So it's similar to math. Teachers will need to know their standards. They can use the practice profile in conjunction with SDI document, looking at the IEP, and again, looking at data. Next slide. So we'll pause a little longer this time so you can get the K-flip. Okay. Next slide. So just to give you some highlights of what's in that tool. Again, building blocks for early reading and writing, not just early childhood, but any of those students who need those foundational skills. what's developmentally appropriate is included in there. There are 8 key components and then some tools and resources. You'll notice we do not have a walkthrough instrument, and I will say yet, that's something that we are looking to do in the future. Again, it's a lot of work to build one of those and make sure that it's solid, but that's something that we're looking to build in the future. So we would love to hear from anyone in the field who thinks that's necessary to help us collect data on the use of that. Next slide. So again, just wanted to leave you with some additional resources, and that link will be available when you receive this PowerPoint in the Dose One Stop. But we have a lot of tools that are available for you on our website, and we can continually grow those materials. We vet those materials, so there's so much information, and we try to keep it to the highest quality we can. It may be things that we haven't created, it may be national resources, but it is so important that you have what you need to balance your compliance and your efforts to improve student achievement, and we're going to continue to do that. So if you have, and next slide. So if you have any needs, or if you have any suggestions of ways that we can provide additional support to you and your staff, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And we're always happy to hear from you. And that is it for me.
Thank you. And I just want to thank you very much, Veronica, but I want to quickly jump in and say, we spend a lot of time as special education directors and preschool coordinators thinking about compliance and how to make sure that we're compliant on all of our paperwork pieces. But this part was very important to remind you, you are an instructional leader. And so thinking about instructional components of what your students need is as important, if not more so, than the compliance pieces as well. Okay, Frank, am I right that it's to Susan next? Okay, Susan.
Hello, everybody. Let's get started. As Steve indicated, my framework for my presentation is what, so what, and now what. I have 3 whats. I'm going to go over behavior, discipline resources, indicator 4, and significant disproportionality. Then I'm going to touch on the so what. The so what is, why did I go over this information? What are the implications? What are your insights? Why is it important? What impact does this have on students with disabilities and their outcomes? And then the now what is, what are you going to do with this information? What are your next steps? As I go through my presentation, feel free to jot down your so what's and now what's. I want to make sure that you leave today with a tangible activity. Okay, let's start with the 3 what's. What number 1 are 3 resources from OSEEL. And the first resource I want to highlight is in July 2022, OSEEL released a comprehensive guidance package on IDEA's discipline and behavior requirements. And this package includes 5 items. One of the items is a letter from the Secretary of Education. Another is a Dear Colleague letter from Valerie Williams, the director of OSEEL. And the third item is a fact sheet that summarizes public schools' obligations under Section 504 to provide FAPE to K-12 students with a disability-based behavior, to make reasonable modifications to disciplinary policies, and to make student discipline requirements in a non-discriminatory manner. The fourth item as part of this package is the guidance document itself. And I've indicated the table of contents over here, lots of good information, 41 pages of great stuff. I want to highlight just 3 things that the guidance mentions. One is IEP teams must address the behavioral needs of a child with a disability through evaluation, reevaluation, IEP development, and implementation. IEP teams must consider the use of positive behavioral interventions and supports. And when a child with a disability demonstrates behavior that impedes the child's learning or that of others, appropriate behavioral supports may be necessary to ensure that the child receives FAPE. And then the fifth item as part of this guidance document is a Q&A document. And I've listed the table of contents here. Like the guidance document itself, lots of good stuff in it, 57 pages. I encourage you to look over it. All right, my second one is a discipline and behavior series blog that was started by Valerie Williams in December 2022. And it consists of 8 posts surrounding discipline and behavior. I highly recommend this. They have lots of information surrounding discipline and behavior. Then the third OSEP resource is a positive supports webpage that includes an online database of over 200 resources related to reducing exclusionary discipline. And they break it out into 3 types of activities. One is data about how to collect and analyze and report out on your discipline data. Systems goes over multiple tiered systems of support on addressing behavioral issues. And then practices includes evidence-based practices surrounding discipline and behavior. All right. We have our 3 resources, but before I proceed with indicator 4, it's important to know what is a disciplinary removal. And this is any instant in which a student with a disability is removed from his or her educational placement for disciplinary purposes. This includes in-school suspensions, out-of-school suspensions, expulsions, removals by school personnel to an interim alternative educational setting, and removals by a hearing officer. But there's another type of removal that often flies under the radar, and OSEP doesn't want it to fly under the radar anymore. And they've named this type of removal informal removal. And these are off-the-book suspensions that happen somewhat frequently, and at least more frequently than we want. An example is if a principal calls a parent and say, hey, can you come get Johnny? He's acting up. He really needs to go home for the rest of the day. Or maybe someone from the school calls the parent and says, you know, for the next week, I think it's best if Sally just attended school from 8 to 12. She really needs to go home in the afternoon. Another example is if a teacher says, you know, this student can't attend the field trip or the special event because of their behavior. These are informal removals, and they really are suspensions, but often they go uncounted and are not reported as suspensions. To find out more about informal removals, you can read the guidance document, of course, as well as one of Valerie Williams' blog posts. And the link is here, and you'll be provided with the link later. All right, just to drive home the point that suspension data is really important and it really needs to be focused on, I wanted to give you some statistics. So in 21-22, students with disabilities experienced 1.9 million disciplinary removals. And they experienced over 3 million missed school days due to out-of-school suspensions. Based on 18-19 data, the number of disciplinary removals per 100 students with disabilities was 29. And then if we disaggregate it by race ethnicity, you can see that there really are some large differences. So at one end of the scale, we have Asian Americans who experience 6 disciplinary removals per 100 students with disabilities. And at the other end, African Americans experience 64 disciplinary removals per 100 African American students with disabilities. So hopefully this has piqued your interest in suspension data. So let's talk about indicator 4. Indicator 4 has 2 parts, 4A and 4B. And for each of these, states report the percentage of LEAs that have a significant discrepancy in the rate of out-of-school suspensions and expulsions greater than 10 days in a school year. Each state gets to define significant discrepancy. And indicator 4 is a data lag. So for the 22-23 APR, which was submitted on February 1st, 2024, for indicator 4, 21-22 data was examined. So for each LEA, an indicator 4 rate is calculated. And what we do is we take the number of students with disabilities who are suspended or expelled for greater than 10 days, and we divide it by the total number of students with disabilities at that LEA. So in this example, we have 5 students who were suspended out of 10 students who were enrolled, so that translates to 50%. Then we compare this LEA rate to a threshold. And if it exceeds the threshold, then the LEA undergoes a review of its policies, practices, and procedures. Indicator 4A looks at all students with disabilities, and indicator 4B looks at students with disabilities by race ethnicity. So for example, you'd calculate the same rate based just on Asian Americans, African Americans, Hispanics, etc. Well, how does Kentucky define significant discrepancy for 4A? If an LEA has an indicator 4A rate that is at least 3 times higher than the state rate, and that LEA has at least 50 enrolled students with disabilities, then that LEA is flagged for significant discrepancy. In 21-22, across the state of Kentucky, 0.45% of students with disabilities were suspended for greater than 10 days. So we multiply that number by 3 to get 1.35%. That is our threshold. So if an LEA has suspended 2% of its students with disabilities and has at least 50 enrolled students with disabilities, it would be flagged. Based on 21-22 data, 12 LEAs were flagged for significant discrepancy, and all 12 were found to have inappropriate policies, procedures, and/or practices. 4B is similar but different. So just like 4A, we use the same threshold. So if a 4B rate is at least 3 times higher than the state rate, and that LEA has at least 10 enrolled students with disabilities in that racial ethnic category, then that LEA is flagged. So if my rate at my district is 2% for Hispanic students, and I have 8 Hispanic students enrolled, then I'm not going to be flagged. But if I have 10 students enrolled, I will be flagged. Based on 21-22 data, 26 LEAs were flagged for significant discrepancy, and of these, 16 were found to have inappropriate policies, procedures, and practices. If an LEA is found to be non-compliant, correction of non-compliance must occur. And this just shows a graphic view of what I talked about. So for both 4A and 4B, we look to see, does the LEA meet the minimum N size regarding number of students enrolled? If so, we calculate their suspension expulsion rate. If the rate does not exceed the threshold, then that's that. But if it does exceed the threshold, then there's a review of the policies and procedures and practices. If the policy is not non-compliant, then nothing needs to happen. But if non-compliance is found, then a correction has to occur. All right, moving right along to significant disproportionality, which I will now refer to as SIGDIS. So usually I have about 30 minutes to go over significant disproportionality. Today I have about 5 minutes, so we'll see how I do. So SIGDIS in special education exists when LEAs identify, place in more restrictive settings, or discipline children from any racial or ethnic group at markedly higher rates than their peers. States must examine SIGDIS for 7 racial ethnic groups. They're listed here. And they must examine 14 categories of analysis. There are 7 types of identification, 2 types of placement, 5 types of discipline. Here's the 7 types of identification. Since our focus is on discipline, I'm just going to keep going. There's 2 types of placement, and then here's our 5 types of discipline. So we look at out-of-school suspensions and expulsions of 10 days or fewer, out-of-school suspensions and expulsions of more than 10 days. Then we look at in-school suspensions of 10 days or fewer, and in-school suspensions of more than 10 days. And then we look at disciplinary removals in total. So if I have 3 disciplinary removals, Emily has 5 and Billy has 6, we add those up to 14, and that is what is counted. So we're not counting number of students with disciplinary removals, we're counting number of removals themselves. Oh, I should say that out-of-school suspensions and expulsions of more than 10 days, this is very similar to 4B in terms of we're looking at this for each racial ethnic category. However, the methodology surrounding SIG-DIS is different from our methodology for indicator 4B. All right, so in terms of figuring out SIG-DIS, what the state does is they calculate a risk ratio for each LEA, for each racial ethnic group, for each of the 14 categories of analysis. So in theory, any given LEA could have 98 risk ratios calculated. 7 times 14 equals 98, providing they have enough activities in each of those categories. So a lot of risk ratios. The methodology for SIG-DIS for Kentucky is they have a risk ratio threshold of 3.0, minimum cell size of 10, minimum N size of 30. They look at 3 years of data, and they look at reasonable progress of 0.05. I'm going to give you an example to drive that point home. Okay, so let's say an LEA has 100 Hispanic students with disabilities, and it suspends 40 of these in terms of an ISS in-school suspension of less than 10 days. So the ISS less than 10 rate for Hispanics at this LEA is 40%. 40 divided by 100 equals 0.4. This LEA has 30 non-Hispanic students with disabilities, and it suspends 8 of them for an ISS less than 10 rate. So that rate is 8 divided by 30, which equals 26.67%. So the risk ratio is taking the 40% divided by the 26.67% to get 1.5. However, I said that we have minimum cell sizes and N sizes. The minimum cell size has to be 10, which refers to the numerator. So we don't have enough non-Hispanic students suspended for us to use this rate. And so therefore, we use an alternate risk ratio. So what's an alternate risk ratio? That is looking at the state data for the comparison group. So let's say that this state has 312,000 non-Hispanic students with disabilities, and statewide, 31,200 of them are suspended for an out-of-school suspension. So the ISS less than 10 rate for non-Hispanic students at the state is 10%. 31,200 divided by 312,000 equals 0.10. So the alternate risk ratio for this LEA, who suspended 40% of their Hispanic students, is 40% divided by the 10%, which equals 4.0. So this LEA suspends 4 times as many Hispanic students with disabilities than non-Hispanic students with disabilities at the state level. So the threshold in Kentucky is 3.0. So since 4.0 exceeds 3.0, the state would then look to see what was the risk ratio or alternate risk ratio for this LEA in 2020-21 and in 21-22. Was it 3.0 or higher? If it wasn't, then the LEA is not flagged for SIG-DIS. However, if all 3 years it was at or above 3.0, then the state looks to see, did this LEA make progress over time? So if in 2021, the risk ratio was 4.5, and then it was 4.4, they reduced it by 0.1, which meets the minimum requirements for progress. And then it went from 4.1 to 4.0. And so once again, it showed a reduction. So in order to be flagged, you have to exceed the state threshold for 3 years in a row, and you can't have made progress. So what happens if you are flagged for SIG-DIS? You have to reserve 15% of your IDA Part B funds for comprehensive coordinated early intervening services. You have to review and, if appropriate, revise policies, practices, and procedures. And you have to publicly report out on the revision of these policies, practices, and procedures. So it's a big deal to be flagged for SIG-DIS. So all of you should be saying, okay, so what? So let's talk about the so what. Why is behavior and discipline of students with disabilities so important? Well, there are many reasons, and I've listed a few of them. So sometimes suspensions are warranted. We all know that, particularly those due to safety. However, suspensions rarely address the underlying issues contributing to the behavior. And the root causes of the behavior need to be determined and addressed, or nothing's going to change. Suspension serves as a disruption to learning. Time away from school can lead to increased gaps in learning and hinder academic growth. Suspensions can exacerbate existing behavioral challenges by removing the student from the supportive structure of the school environment. Research shows that out-of-school suspensions do not serve as a deterrent to future problem behavior. Research also shows that students who are suspended are more likely to drop out. Also, compared to students without disabilities, students with disabilities are disproportionately subjected to suspensions. And further, students with disabilities from marginalized backgrounds are disproportionately subjected to suspensions. That gets back to that national data I shared to you about African American students. And so we really need to figure out, why is this the case? What can be done about this? And of course, it's a requirement of IDA to focus on behavior and discipline. So now I leave you with your now what? What are your next steps? What are you going to do about your own discipline and behavior back at your LEA? So I will turn it back over to whoever's turn it is.
Okay, so we're going to talk about now information or using data to inform special education behavior. So let's go on to the next slide. So the first question is, and some of you who are in this presentation may have just heard me do this presentation this morning, or a similar one. So why document behavior events? Why do we have to do that? Well, first of all, it's the law. That is one important reason. Secondly, we need this data for decision making, for districts, for schools, for students. You know, the student data is information, right? For an ARC to say, okay, so every Monday morning, Johnny has, you know, is acting this way. Why is it, you know, what's happening? Where if you didn't document that, you might not see those patterns. And then for documentation, so let's say a fight occurs in your school in August, and you and your administrators think, there's no way I'm going to forget this. This was a big fight. It was the second day of school. Like, this is a big deal. And so you just enter the basic information in Infinite Campus that needs to be entered. And then in August or in April, a dad comes in and decides they're gonna sue over something that happened during that fight. Well, if you had that documented in Infinite Campus at the beginning, then you could go back. There's a pretty good chance that the principal doesn't remember it, because several fights have happened between now and then, right? But if all that data is in Infinite Campus, then you can go back and look and say, oh yeah, this is what happened. This is how we handled it. And so you have that information for you at your fingertips and in an official format. Okay, next slide. Okay, so in July 2022, I think somebody mentioned this earlier, OSEP, the Office of Special Education Programs, came out with guidance on discipline that sort of backed up what we've already been training, but they are always the official the official rule, right? So one of the things that it talked about was informal removals, things like sending a student home early from class, or sending a kid out in the hall for 45 minutes. Different things that we might do that you might not think need to be recorded, but do. And again, that's part of that discipline. I mean, part of that data documentation piece. Okay, next slide. A manifestation determination. So a manifestation determination is required within 10 school days of any decision to change the placement of a student. And placement of a student is defined within these regulations and the question and answer link here. So these are things that you need to be aware of if you are removing students with disabilities. Next slide. Okay, state resolutions. Let's go ahead. So when something occurs within the classroom or within a school or on school time, for it to be documented in Infinite Campus, there are two pieces that we look at. We look at the event, and we look at the resolution. The resolution is how things were resolved. Like, was a parent called? Was the student suspended? Were they given in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension? If, excuse me, if that removal or if that resolution ended in a removal of the student from their educational placement, then that is considered a removal and must be documented. So a disciplinary removal is any instance in which a child is removed from his or her educational placement for disciplinary purposes. So if a student asks to go see the guidance counselor, that if no behavior occurred, that's not a removal for disciplinary purposes. If the ARC meets and decides, not because of any disciplinary action, but just a student might be better served in an alternative school, that is not a disciplinary removal. That is a change in placement. So this is any instance in which a student is removed from his or her educational placement for disciplinary purposes. And that includes in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, expulsion, and IAES, interim alternative educational setting, which is a much longer topic than we have time for today. Next slide. So to find the removals, you're gonna go to the Safe Schools report. This is the official data. The Safe Schools report is the official data that we use when we're calculating significant disproportionality, significant discrepancy. We can use Tableau, which I think Jared's going to talk about later, and some other tools to view the data. But the Safe Schools data is the official data. And so to run this in Infinite Campus, you're going to go to Kentucky State Reporting, and then you're going to go down to Safe Schools. This is all supposed to be in one line, but it didn't all fit on the screen. Next slide.
So
Yes.
if I may just really quickly here, Amy, some of you all may not have access to this report. So if you do not have access, that's based on your IC person in your district. This is something you really, as nurses, need access to. So we're happy to back you up to say that you need that access to that report. So please check to see. So go back if you're not on IC right now, which I hope you're not, and paying really awesome attention. But make sure that you go in and see if you have access to that. If not, ask your IC person in your district to give you access to this report. Sorry, Amy.
No, thanks, Jared. And it's safe. There are two Safe Schools reports. One is Safe Schools. The other is Safe Schools Historical. You don't need Safe Schools Historical. That is data from 2017 and previous. So the only one you need is Safe Schools. Okay, so when you run the Safe Schools report, there's a little checkbox at the bottom that says active special ed at time of incident. So that's what you're going to check if you only want students with disabilities. If you want to look at all of them, there is a field that says IEP or student with disability. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but if that has a Y, you can filter for that. So if you have the whole report, you can do that. But if you only want students with disabilities, just check active special ed at time of incident. Make sure you have all the schools highlighted and click Run Extract. Next slide. So how a student is included, and you don't necessarily think this is important until it is. So when districts get pulled get identified with significant disproportionality or significant discrepancy, they always want to know how students are included. So again, the Safe Schools report is the official report that we use. Any any student who has a sum of removal lengths greater than 0 or any removal greater than 0, any removal length of 0 will be removed. So only students who have a removal length greater than 0 will be included. Resolution state code. So when you enter when the data are entered into Infinite Campus, and I realize that you guys are typically not the ones entering the data. It's someone else. You have to review it after the fact. I wish I could do something about that. I wish I could give you guys more leverage in that. But when you're reviewing it, there are 2 columns in the Safe Schools report. There's the district resolution code and there's the resolution state code. Not all, but most removals are mapped to a resolution state code. Those are the only ones we look at. We don't look at the ones that say called parent or after school detention. So you want to look at one of the resolution state codes, which I think I have a list of those later. Sometimes demographic data switches during the school year. Sometimes if a student transfers from one district to another, they might change races. They often change disabilities. They often change EL status. I've actually seen a couple of students change genders in the last year. So all demographic data for a student is obtained from the child count report if the student is on child count. Most of the students are, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they may have had the incident before they were, they may have had the incident before, and then they were dismissed from special education or something like that. So they may not be on the child count report. If they are on the child count report, we use the demographic data from that. If they are not on the child count report, we use the demographic data from that student's final record in Safe Schools. Next slide. So these are the ways that we report special education for discipline data. Now, there are other ways you can get identified for significant disproportionality. Jared's going to talk about that. But we look at these 5 different ways. And so I've had people say to me, well, it doesn't matter as long as it's not out of school, or it doesn't matter as long as it's not 10 days or more. Well, yeah, it does. So these are the categories that we look at. Next slide. And then significant disproportionality is indicators 4A and 4B. And for that, we look at out of school removals greater than 10 days. It's a different calculation from significant disproportionality for significant discrepancy. Sorry, I just saw Alicia's, it'll be a great idea to check Safe Schools data at least quarterly. I agree. I check it as often as I can, but I can't always get to it. So it's a good idea for you to have your schools do it. So 4A, you may get identified for 4A and B, but not for significant disproportionality or vice versa, because it is a different calculation. Excuse me, next slide. So these are the resolution codes I was talking about. Physical restraint and seclusion is not considered a removal at this time, mostly because, physical restraint, not seclusion. Thank you, Jared. Physical restraint is not included as a removal at this time, mainly because they're so short that they don't usually register. Seclusion is considered an in-school removal.
So
Next.
if I could just step in here really quickly.
Yeah.
This is, so when you all look at your reports, the Safe Schools report will only pull essentially what you see on the screen here. If you look in Tableau, if you look at IC, it's going to have a non-Safe Schools item. So there's a difference between those two. The ones for which reporting comes to us, and we have to report up to OSEP in DC, those are Safe Schools incidents. So that's exactly what you see here on the screen, with the exception of physical restraint in Kentucky. By the way, that's a Kentucky law. Just keep that in mind. But that is considered, seclusion is considered a removal, again, like Amy said, while physical restraint is not. Just because that's the way it's kind of outlined in that guidance that was referred to earlier by Susan. But just keep in mind, these are the codes you're looking for. And the SSP codes, the 1, 2, and 3, and the in-district and in-school removals are your most common. So these others are kind of outliers depending on the district, but those are the ones you really want to hone in on as you're looking at your data.
SSP2 just, and I'm going to go through I'll go through these.
Yeah, SSP2 is not that common. I think I said 1 through 3, but yeah.
Yeah, you did. You
not that
did.
common.
I've seen it more often than I should.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's probably an error typically. So
typically.
Yep.
Okay. 3 guardrails. So an in-school suspension may not be considered a part of the days of suspension addressed in this regulation as long as the following requirements are met. And I had this conversation with the group I was training this morning. This is very, very difficult to do. If you feel like these have been met appropriately, record that in your resolution details in Infinite Campus, or record it somewhere. Just be sure you have it available to send to us if there's any monitoring that occurs. So these are the 3 requirements. The child is afforded the opportunity to continue to appropriately participate in the general curriculum. The child continues to receive the services specified on the child's IEP, and the child continues to participate with non-disabled children to the extent they would have in their current placement. So there's 2 links to show you where that came from. It's really hard to get all 3 of those. Pretty easy to get 2 of them. Very difficult to get 3 and do it well. So just if you feel like you've done that, just document it. And you know, we'll go forward from there. Okay, next slide. So we have definitions of each of these coming up. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go through it quickly. But I'm just going to kind of run through them. So the important thing I want to point out here for in-school suspension is the regular educational program or setting encompasses the school day and includes instructional time, lunch, recess, and study periods. We had a conversation with somebody yesterday who said, I did not know that. And, you know, she's been in the role a while. So you guys have a lot of things on your mind, and maybe that has slipped your mind, but it's something important to keep in mind when you're reviewing your discipline data. Okay, next slide. In-district removal is typically, not always, but typically this is if a student is sent to an alternative school that's off-site from where the student is normally, the building they're normally in. This is considered an out-of-school removal for special education purposes, because of funding and all that. For safe schools purposes, it's considered an in-school removal, but for special education, it's considered out of school. Next slide. Expelled with services, so the ARC has to meet and determine where the student is going to be receiving their services. You have to do what you need to do to keep your building safe and to keep your district safe. So if you have to expel students, you have to expel students. Just make sure you do it and follow the IDEA requirements when you do it. Next slide. Expelled without services. I have seen these. I've had one case where the guy said, yep, I did it, and he's not receiving services. I've had a couple of cases of those recently, but no, that's not the right answer. We're going to find a way for you to change that. A lot of times it is a mistake when I see this. And then a couple of times we've had some sort of strange circumstances where the students declined services after they were expelled. And so we kind of have to work through those. But if there's an SSP2, I'm going to be contacting you probably in the next 2 months and saying, hey, we gotta figure out what's going on. Okay, next slide. Out of school suspension, that one kind of speaks for itself. Just remember, attendance has to be recorded appropriately as well. So if the student is expelled out of school, or sorry, suspended out of school, then they have to be marked absent as well. And if they are asked to leave school the day before for a couple of hours, you know, before they're expelled, before they're suspended the next day, that counts as part of it as well. Next slide. Restraint. There's the definition. I'm not even going to try to explain it. But this is not calculated as a removal at the moment. Next slide. Seclusion. There's a definition. Again, not something I want to get into in the 5 minutes I have left. This is in Kentucky regulation, and it is considered an in-school removal. Okay, next slide. IAES. There's a guide. The link here talks about the guidance around IAES. There are very specific circumstances around it. So if you've read that and have questions, please feel free to reach out to me or Jared or anyone in OSEEL, and we'll be happy to get you to the right person for answers. Next slide. We can skip this one. And these are the state reported resolutions that we use for the Safe Schools, or from the Safe Schools report, to do our calculations. Next slide. These are some common reporting errors. The most common is 3 different behaviors will occur that will lead to 1 removal, and each one of those is recorded as a separate resolution. So the student may have been removed 1 time, but it shows up as 3 times. And so it looks like the student was removed for 3 days, which doesn't matter for 3 days, but if the student was removed for 4 days at a time and it shows up 3 times, that gets you over the 10 days. You didn't do manifestation determination. It really wasn't timed to, but it looks like it was, so you just need to be careful of that. The other thing you need to be aware of is I will be reaching out any resolutions that occurred on non-instructional days. So if the student was removed, for example, on a snow day, or they miscoded it and put it in for a Saturday, those show up as blanks or sometimes zeros. So I'll be reaching out to districts in the next couple of months and asking them to fix these. These do not show up on an error report, but that doesn't mean they're not errors. So they will need to be fixed. Okay, next slide. I feel like I'm rushing, sorry. Do you want to lead this one, Jared, or do you want me to? Okay. We probably don't have time to get through all these, but what we're going to talk about is, was this a removal? Should this be counted as an in-school removal? So Natasha has an IEP. She became disruptive during her science class. Her teacher called the principal, who walked her from her class, and she sat in his office to complete her assignment. So the question is, was this an in-school removal? Well, did a behavior event occur? Y'all can put it in the chat if you want. Or unmute. Alicia, did a behavior event occur? Okay, we got a yes. Yes, it did.
I'm going to get popsicle sticks out and randomly choose people. I'm just telling
Okay.
you.
I'll let you. Okay, so did the behavior event occur? Yes. Was the student removed from her typical schedule or setting? Yes, I got a yes. Got a couple yeses.
Now the chat is firing up.
All right, they're waking up.
Yeah.
Okay, so if the answer to both of these questions is yes, then the behavior should be recorded as the resolution should be recorded as an in-school removal. Okay, let's go on to another scenario. Oh, there we go. So a behavior event has to occur and the student has to be removed from their typical schedule or setting. Okay, next slide. Okay.
One more.
Yeah, one more. Sorry, I'm getting ahead. Okay, Robert started to exhibit signs of stress, such as clenching his fists and rapid breathing. His teacher recognized his warning signs and suggested he go take a drink of water and then return to class. Okay, so did a behavior event occur? I've gotten one no. Nope. No behavior event occurred.
So the question is warning signs. That's the key point.
Yep. And so here, was the student removed from his typical schedule or setting? He kind of was. He was removed from that setting because he was no longer in that classroom. Now, here's the thing. He came back, right? We have to assume he came back, but he was not in his setting for a while. Is this an in-school removal? No. This is not an in-school removal. Yes, the behavior event did not occur. Yes, the student went somewhere else for a while, but it is not a removal because the teacher was proactive, not reactive. The teacher said, I see Robert, he's getting upset. I know these signs. I'm going to say, hey, go take a drink of water. Just take a breath and then come back. Now, if he doesn't come back, you got a whole other situation on your hands. We're going to not talk about that. So next slide. So the event is not an INSR. It's still a good idea to write this down in some kind of progress data so that you have this data to share with the ARC. And so you can recognize those signs on your own. Next slide.
I can do this one, Amy, if you want.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're going to be able to have time to get through all these. So we
Yeah,
can do
let's
this
just
one
do
in a
maybe
minute.
one or two more here. I think that's what we
Okay.
talked about if we ran out of time.
Yeah.
So Angela, a third grade student, became agitated during a group project and used profanity to express her emotions. Angela's behavior intervention planner, her BIP, stated she could be sent to another third grade teacher's classroom following a behavior event. Following Angela's BIP, Mr. Compton sent Angela to Miss Williams' classroom across the hall to cool down. So did the behavior event occur? Yes or no? So yeah, I'm going to do the thumbs up, thumbs down.
You're getting lots of yeses in the chat.
I think so. I think the answer is yes. Now, question, was that student removed from the typical schedule or setting or their LRE? So think about that. Their typical setting or their LRE.
Your typical schedule.
Typical schedule. Are they typically in Miss Williams' class? Or are they in Mr. Compton's class? That's the question. So the answer is, drum roll, yes.
Okay, I'm going to say something here.
Go ahead.
So the answer to both of these is yes, which means it should get recorded. Here's what you need to keep in mind. Yeah, you're going to have to record this, but is this better than removing a kid all day from school because of profanity? Yeah, I mean, this is still a win, right? I understand by law it has to be recorded. This is still a data point that has to be recorded, but you still want to do what's best for kids. And this is better for that kid than sending them home. So while we're saying this, because we have to, because it's the law, you still want to make the right decisions. And
It's
this
about
is better than other
documentation.
options.
And that's where we get into manifestations and things like that is, are we documenting what's happening with this child correctly? And the answer is those are both yeses, because that's what it is. So even though that is a strategy, and it's a great strategy to do that, it still gets recorded as part of the data set, exactly like a data set, like Amy said.
Okay, next slide. So Just because it's in the IEP or BIP as a preventative behavior measure or strategy doesn't change that the behavior occurred and the student was removed. Okay, I'm sorry, Jared, you're next.
Oh, oh my goodness, you gave me the good one, Amy. Come on now. So Jasmine is a 10th grade student with an IEP diagnosed as anxiety and ADHD. During the afternoons, she has a particularly difficult time paying attention, especially when her anxiety is heightened. As a self-regulation strategy, Jasmine's IEP states that she is permitted to request a short visit to the counselor's office when she finds her anxiety is impacting her ability to complete work or pay attention. Jasmine requests this more on some days than others. Did an event occur? Come on. Give me a yes, give me a no. It's okay. There's no silly answers. No silly answers.
You have a 50% chance of being right.
That's right. Did it occur?
A behavior event. Did a
A
behavior
behavior
event.
event. So again, she's taking her break when she has heightened anxiety. The answer is, drum roll, no. So why didn't it occur? That's the question. Think about how that was put. It was written into her IEP, and it's a self-regulation strategy. That's why that's a no. Were they removed, though?
Even if it was written into her IEP,
Yeah.
if a behavior occurred,
Yes. Yeah. If the
it'd be
behavior,
different.
if the
Yes.
behavior occurred.
But because in this case, it was about being proactive,
Mhm.
about dealing with the anxiety before things get worse, the behavior event did not occur. Okay, sorry. Go
So
ahead.
was she removed, though, from the LRE? What is her typical setting? I see a yes. Come on, don't be shy. If you're of a certain age, you're looking for Arid Extra Dry. I know Alicia just got that. Thank you, Alicia. So the answer is drum roll. And I can't see that. Does it say yes? I can't see that corner over there, Amy.
It says yes. So
I've
the student,
got the Brady Bunch over there in my way.
so it says the student was removed from her typical schedule or setting. In this case, she removed herself. But it's still the same idea. She's no longer in her regular setting. So is this an in-school removal? Next slide. No. Now, again, these are things you probably want to be taking data on. See if there's a pattern, if it's happening, certain days of the week, certain times of the day. If she's taking advantage, if she's not taking advantage, if she's not using it enough, those are things that you need to be aware of. And, and I say you, probably the teacher needs to know these things. But this is all, it's important to understand that this was not an in-school removal. Okay, you're up, Jared.
So I was going to say, Alicia, I think I have 5 minutes left. Is that correct?
You have a few more than that.
Okay. I want to make sure that folks get this. And again, I don't think you have already received these slides. I think you're going to receive these slides. If I'm incorrect on that, someone please correct.
That is correct. We'll post the presentations when we post on Dose One Slide.
Sure. And by the way, folks, this is a 100 level course. This is not a definitive end all be all course. We're happy to go more in depth with you. That's not a problem. We may even be back later on in this process to do a 200 level with you. But the fact is, it's a lot, and you all balance a lot as doses, and particularly as new doses. And I see one of my favorite doses who's who's new on here, one or two of those on here. And I know they've had a lot because they're also significant disproportionality in CCEIS districts. So they got some fun stuff their first year in, and my definition of fun's a little skewed. So let's go to the next slide. So the best place for you to look for data on your district, on districts around you, on statewide data, and Amy maintains this page, is the OSEEL data visualization page. And what I've done on there is I've put some asterisks by what are the most useful district tools. We do not have time to sit here right now and go into each one of them. But, you know, I'm going to tell you, some of you are going spring break. You'll sit in Florida next week. Feel free on the beach. I mean, this is what you want to do, is look at some special education tools, right? I mean, that's your idea of fun. But actually, I would tell you, if you're a data geek at all, there's some really neat stuff in here. If you're brand new to your district or to the role, it's full of data. And the IEP distribution maps, the comparison tool, so you can compare yourself to surtax or RTCs around you. You can compare yourself to state. You can compare yourself to your neighbor. So if you're in Knott County, you can compare yourself to Perry County, which is always fun to see how that's going. So there's also on there, if you haven't seen it, the Special Education Indicator Dashboard. And I put the categories there. The two most on there for you are school districts and district profiles. So two really important items. Again, I just encourage you, when you want on the beach having fun next week, not reading a book, you can look at this link. I know everyone's going to do that. So, next page, please. So as Amy told you earlier, the most definitive behavior piece is using that Safe Schools report. The issue is, if you don't know how to do a pivot table, it can get a little fun. And so that's what I want to talk to you about. This one talks about the QA SPED report. If you haven't taken a look at that one, I would encourage you to do that. What I've done here is I've included a piece for you all to be able to pull to see. You've got three choices when you look at the QA SPED. This is in KDE reports and QA SPED. Again, as I said earlier, if you don't have access to these reports, you should, as those, they assign those typically. But if you don't, contact your IC person in your district and say, hey, they said I need access to this. KDE said, don't you all love how that happens sometimes? Say, KDE said I need to have access to this. So that special education enrollment report has three choices. You've got the detail report that will list every single student in your district by the category in which they've been identified. So FMD, MMD, OHI, SLD. It gives you a count across the board. Down at the bottom, though, if you'll notice, particularly if you've got over-identification possibly happening, you can do that aggregate report. That will show you, let's say that you've got a school of, and I'm about to say a really small school here, so hang on. You've got a school of 300 kids, and you've got 60 of them identified as OHI. You've got an over-identification problem in that school because that's 20% of your population. So it's a really easy way for you all to see, get snapshots of your districts, the schools within your districts, and to be able to look at data to say, okay, what are my trends as far as how many students are identified within this school? Go to the next page if you would, please. So Tableau. You may not have access to Tableau. Let me just say, let me throw a cautionary piece here. Tableau is not the definitive be-all source for data for special education. There can be some disagreements in special education data and what's in Safe Schools and what's in that QA SPED report that we just saw. The definitive sources are QA SPED, your child count, and Safe Schools. This is a formative tool. Formative tool. Formative tool. Notice how I'm saying that. You can use this, though, to have conversations with building district folks to say, here are the trends we have showing. There is a user guide that I've included here that will literally walk your IC person through how to grant you access to the actual report. If you'll go on to the next page, please. So Tableau. So what you need to do, once you get in there, there's tabs at the top. You're going to look for IC behavior analysis. You remember what I said earlier about the asterisk? Those are the two most vital pieces in terms of your reporting. Count of days removed. Notice that's not total removals. Not total removals. The count of days removed. So if you're looking at in school and out of school, greater than 10, equal to or less than 10. You're going to be able to look. If you've got a kid trending towards manifestation, you're going to be able to see that here. And I'm going to tell you all this in case you haven't learned it. Your principals don't always call you and say that they've removed a kid for seven or 8 days. And you all find out after the fact, and it ends up being a problem for you all as doses. So this is a way for you to be able to look quickly and see as a district where the problems are bubbling up. Go to the next page, please. So what we've done is we've put a count of days removed sample here on the screen. Notice on the right-hand side and this is Amy's slide, so I'm going to try to just walk through this. I'm going to try to move the Brady Bunch here. Notice that there's a couple things. It does not default to special education. So you have to change that to default to special education. Notice it defaults at state codes, and it also defaults at 8 days. Well, obviously, by the time of 8 days total removed, you may have a problem. So you want to go back in and change that back to 0 to see all your removals of all your special education students in the district. You want to filter your special ed to yes. You want to make sure that those filters are on so you can see what the levels of removals are within the room. I don't think we have time for our activity. Am I right on that, Alicia?
You're good on time.
Okay. I didn't want to get too far in the weeds here. So if we could go to the next page. There's also the event by counts by student group. Notice what you can do here, and this is mine. As you can tell, I'm not as quiet as high tech as Amy is in terms of her. I apparently just used Microsoft Paint to do this. It looks like, but you'll notice that I have the student group over there highlighted in a really horrible fashion with primary disability, and what it will do is it will show you. And notice I also have safe schools filtered. I apparently forgot to check that too. That will show you by category of disability where the safe schools events are occurring. So notice there, let's take a look at this really quickly. What's our number of students with the greatest number of behavior events in this county? Can anybody tell me? What category? Okay. Well, OHI is your total. That is right. But notice it says no safe schools category about 3/4 of the way down there. Remember what we said earlier, that doesn't count for this. So what is your number one with a bullet, not including, I should have said this, the no safe schools category down at the bottom? I'll give you a clue. It's almost a tie by one student, or one incident, not one student. MMD has 52 total events. If you notice, your SLI has 50, your DD has 51. Most folks are surprised by that fact. Statewide, the number one group for behavior incidents is DD. It's K3. It's K3. If you look at the data statewide. All right, if you'll go on to the next page, please. I don't know if we can drop this Jamboard link in the chat for everybody, as well as this Tableau sample report.
Brinley's already got it there for you.
All right, I didn't see. Nope, look at that. That's awesome. So if you all would go click on the Jamboard and on the Tableau sample report. And what I'm just asking y'all to do really quickly, and you've got two sheets here on your Jamboard. The first one I want you to do is tell me on that Tableau sample report, what do you see? Just 2 or 3 observations. What do you see on there? And I've already talked about one of them where the greatest area of identifications were. What else do you see there? It also makes me sad that Jamboard is going away, and they love to tell me that every time. So what do you see? I see
If you're
some of y'all
not familiar with Jamboard, you can pick up a pen along the left-hand side or a sticky note. Any of those ways to write into this Jamboard. The sticky note is right under the big arrow. Mm-hmm.
Yep. I see 17 total people in there with me, so somebody has to be writing. Got an anonymous bat and a camel. I can't even pronounce that. A badger. Come on now. In school suspension. Very good. They are. In school suspensions are high. What else we got?
And Jared, just so you know, I didn't make that slide. Somebody else did. So
Well,
somebody
Jared,
else
sorry.
had access to fancy software that I didn't have.
Oh, I got you. Okay. Well, again, mine was made on Microsoft Paint. I'm pretty sure I'm stuck like in 1995. So
Me too.
yeah, I'm not really, but that was the quickest way to do it. I don't think I used Paint, but one student has more than 10 days of OSS. Mm-hmm. Is that a problem for you all, Zados? Mm-hmm. Anything else, observations that we see there? Lots of people talking about ISS. A high percentage of partial days. Aha. So question for you. Are they encouraging them to go home? That's a good question. Always a good question. Are they providing encouragement? Y'all, I'm a former principal. I will tell you this. I did it by the book. As much as it pained me, I did it by the book. So 35 days of ISS. See, so what this report will allow you all to look very quickly to see what's there. So I won't necessarily go, well, let's go to the next slide really quickly if we've got time. I don't want to kill us here, Alicia. If you progress over to slide 2, if you'll press up at the top there, what do you wonder? So you've had some observations. What did you see? Now, what do you wonder? Are they being encouraged to go home a little early with those partial days? Or did somebody not get their correct medication in the morning? Are there changes of staff? That sort of thing is what we're looking for here. I've got 15 people in here with me. I know you are writing.
And one thing you might want to consider too is if you see some things that really stand out, such as like the 35 days of ISS, you're going to want to go in and look at that data and maybe talk to the person entering it or something and make sure that it's not an error. Sometimes it gets clicked that they're in ISS and the month gets changed or the year gets changed. Strange things happen. So it might not be that they're really suspending that much. It might just be an error in input. We're all human.
Like the year-long restraints that I see because somebody put the wrong date. That looks like somebody was being restrained for a year. And that's what I was going to say too. You know, it could be data error. It could be multiple, like the same incident was in, or the same resolution was entered multiple times. So that's why it's important to have this done at the school level, because the principals know their kids, the teachers know their kids. you might not know in, this elementary school, this kid was really only, suspended for a day, but it looks like he was suspended for 12. But those are the kinds of things that should stand out to somebody who knows the kids.
And we're
Right.
getting some good feedback here from folks. What are the interventions? What are the PBIS strategies, de-escalation? What does ISS look like? Are strategies being taught or reinforced? I mean, it could be any number of things, but the fact of the matter is, this is a quick, easy way for you all to look at your data. Again, the 100 level, so that you're not having to go pull the Safe Schools report, even though it is the definitive source. You can get in Tableau and say, my goodness, I need to have some conversations with folks about what's going on here. It can give you, and you can do it school by school. You can do it elementary, middle, and high. You can do it pre-K or preschool. Gotta stop calling it pre-K. Preschool. At any of those levels to see. The other thing I'm going to tell you all, please, please, please talk to your folks about entering in their data. It's only as good as the data that are entered in to Infinite Campus. And it's a little hard to refer a kid if the data aren't there. So I'm going to get off my high horse. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to me. I think that's the last of my items here.
Okay. And Jared, I want to just share, why are we sharing this with you in March? Why is it important that you all are thinking this way in March? Because, this report isn't due until this summer. Yep. It's because you do need to be going in now and looking at this and checking for errors, checking for patterns. Because if you try to go through and do this in June when everybody's on vacation and they've already left for the summer, the people that you need to be talking to about the data entry aren't going to be in the office to talk to you about it. So it's just, we want to make you aware that, put this on your radar. This is something that will come up for you this summer, but you want to start looking at this now. And again, like I said earlier, looking at this at least quarterly helps you not get to the end of the year and have a lot of things you need to address.
Well, and Alicia, let me just add this, if I may. Unless you've got a really good person who's on top of your Safe Schools report, you're going to have error messages a mile long. And those are items that those folks who originally entered or someone who has the ability to go back and IC and correct those items will have to go back in and correct before it will let you close out your year. So you're better off. The ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure. It always pays. If you go into Safe Schools, if you have access, you hit that, it'll say, oh, you've got 153 errors. Well, guess what? Each one of those has to be touched and fixed. We used to get it from our DPP. I used to send it on to my deans and say, we got to get this fixed. Mm-hmm. And I did mine at least once a month as a principal. So.
And something to add to that, Jared talked about the error report. Some things don't show up in the error report. For example, if a student is removed or has a resolution on a non-instructional day, if you suspended Johnny on January 5th and January 5th turned out to be a snow day, that will show up wrong. And the only way to find that is to go in and look for zeros and blanks in the resolution length column. I'm going to be reaching out to you guys as doses and say, hey, this needs to be fixed. I know you're not the ones to fix it, but you are my people. Congratulations. So I'm going to reach out to you and hope that you guys can talk to the right people to get it fixed. So don't freak out if I get an email. That doesn't mean you're in trouble. It just means I'm trying to get this data to look the best we possibly can.
And folks, don't hesitate in asking us questions or just shooting us a quick email. Amy and I both have this thing called bookings where you can book time to have conversations with us. We're happy to help you. That's why we're here. I'm here to help you all get better outcomes for kids. So is Amy. So are all of us for that fact. That's why we do the jobs we do, just like you all do.
Okay, I think, Frank, we are to you, sir.
Yeah, and actually, before I jump in, Amy and Jared, there was a question in the chat that didn't get addressed. So if it was
from Troy. I think Veronica messaged him.
Okay.
But the answer to your question, Troy, is yes. The data answer is yes. I'm always going to give the data answer, but there's always a caveat. So yes, that is still a removal. But if you need more clarification, I'm going to ask you to reach out to the guidance branch, and I think Veronica gave you that information.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate it. And what a great set of presentations today. Terrific information. And we always, as you know, if you've been attending these, we would like to just finish up with a little bit of a tidbit or a thought-provoking thing for you. And this is something that both Alicia and Veronica have talked about already today. But if you remember back in the first session, Norm Ames, our director from TASTE, talked to you about this idea of being a leader and a manager, and as a dose, the dual roles that you play. And you've heard it said today, the key thing here is about striking that balance between those two roles. You have to be a good, strong instructional leader, and you also have to manage the day-to-day things that are going on. You have to work to avoid getting bogged down on the compliance side of things and looking at the numbers. And a great example that comes to my mind is what Jared was just sharing with you, and your ability to run reports and look at data. And as I was looking at that Jamboard, I was seeing that you all are thinking in the right sort of way. You're looking at that data not to say, oh my gosh, we're out of compliance. You're looking at it saying, hey, we need to talk about what are the patterns here? What is this telling us so that we can be more proactive? That you can work with your teachers and your staff to help them improve their instructional methodologies. That's being an instructional leader. Managing that data is looking at that data and saying, okay, we've got a couple of kids that are either at the 10-day limit or near the 10-day limit. We need to be dealing with that. That's also a good, important part of your role, right? But it's balancing those two things. You need to be strong for your staff. You need to spend time with your staff and, give them the opportunity to open up and to ask you questions and to process with them. That's being a good instructional leader, right? So think about that balance. So that's our takeaway for today. It's not about all being a leader and just paying attention to the vision and where you want to go. And it's also not dealing with putting out brush fires 100% of the time. And if you find that is getting out of balance, then that's a good time to call your friends, to talk to the other people in this group, to call the folks at OSEEL and say, I'm really struggling with, we've got a lot of these kinds of events going on. What kind of things do you know that people do to help? That's what they're there for. They can help you with that, right? So that's it. That's the nugget for today. Think about balance. And if you find yourself being out of kilter, talk to people and ask. There's a lot of support out there for you. So with Alicia, I'll give it back to you to wrap things up.
Absolutely. Thank you. So Brinley is going to be dropping the document that I was telling you about that has all the links that were in the presentations today. So you'll have access to all of those links in that document, and it looks like she's added it in a PDF, and you'll be able to download that. Lots of great information you'll have there. We also are including a survey today just to kind of get a scan on where we are and what we can do to support you and make these meetings more beneficial for you. So please give us that feedback in your survey. And while we have the survey up there, are there any questions that we didn't get addressed? We may not be able to give you the answers today, but we can capture them if you have questions. Again, we understand we give you a lot of information in these, but what our goal is to connect you to the people in OSEEL who cover these areas and to provide you with resources. So I hope those are beneficial for you. And if there are no questions, feel free to log out when you finish your survey. we will see you all in April.